Hi, good evening everybody, and welcome to the daily Rambam Shiur, lesson number 97, 98, and 99, the rules of Ma'acholes Asuris, from chapter 8 till chapter 16. Once upon a time, an observant Jew enters to a restaurant where right the awning was written a kosher one. He was very happy, glad. He was happier twice to find inside his good old friend working there as a mashgiach. He turns to him and he asks him, can I rely upon the level of kashrus in this restaurant? The mashgiach, his friend, looks at him and he tells him like this: whatever you don't eat is on my responsibilities, but whatever you will eat, that is your responsibility. That is on your shoulders. So I guess today the primary subject is, in order to guide us about our responsibilities, to define what is kosher, what is not, what will be done in a case that a kosher product was mixed in a non-kosher, what type of item, even amongst the vegetations and vegetables and fruit, should we consider whether they are kosher or not. Basically, we will cover the most aspects of rules of kashrus that pertaining to the kitchen and to the dietary law. And that will be almost the conclusion of the rules. Tomorrow we will make the official siyum, and we will start the rules of shchito, how to slaughter, and all the customs that are pertaining and associated with that. So the first chapter, we deal with an issue which is called gid hanosheh. In the entire Genesis book of Bereshis, there is only 3 mitzvahs mentioned over there, and one of them is the mitzvah of gid hanosheh. The story goes, when Yaakov was on his way to meet his brother Esau after such a long time where we haven't seen him, so right the evening before, he was struggling with an angel, and he managed to defeat him. However, it came with a price, and the price was that he managed to harm his thigh muscles, which was the socket of the hip. It moved out of its place, and as a result, Yaakov was limping. And therefore, in Chumash Bereshis, it says, Al kain, for that reason, Lo yoichlu bnei Yisrael es gid hanosheh ad hayom hazeh. For that reason, the children of Israel won't eat this thigh muscle until that day. It is very interesting to note the words of Sefer HaChinuch, where he brings a reasoning and the ethical lesson where we can derive from this story. He says it is a remez, it is a message for the Jews that though they will suffer lots of agony and trouble throughout exile from the nations who are oppressing them, nevertheless they are assured that they won't be lost as a collective, but forever they will be around, and a Redeemer will come and take them out from their situation. And when they will remember this message of comfort, they will be able to stick to the righteousness forever. And it is interesting that the Hashgacha Protis in Divine Providence, it comes exactly in the time of Shabbos Nachmu, the Shabbos that is there to comfort us, a double comfort for a double destruction. We have lost our temple twice, and therefore the Nechama, the comfort, is a double one. So indeed, in that eve of that Shabbos, we study as well the idea of the Gid hanosheh. Now, biblically, the only thing that is prohibited is this part that is attached to the part that is of the socket, of the thigh socket. So, however, from there, this is biblically only the vein that goes through the muscle that goes through the thigh socket and is attached to it, only that part is prohibited. However, rabbinically, the entire muscle is restricted. Now, both thighs, right and left as well, and also an animal that belongs to Kodoshim, part of the offerings, it is also prohibited to benefit and to consume this part of the Gid hanosheh. It is important to note that the restriction is only by an animal, not by a bird. Any form of bird, there is no restriction of Gid hanosheh. It is important also to mention that in that particular chapter, the scope of topics that are being discussed are way beyond the issue of Gid hanosheh only, and they including also a very interesting topic, a trust that was breached. A person who is a butcher, that he is presumed to be credible individual, and he breached his trust by selling with his meat an item that Gid hanosheh is included, and for that matter, not necessarily any form of a product that is not kosher that is being sold by a butcher that presumably he is honest. So first of all, he needs to return the funds he received for that not kosher item which were sold presumably as kosher. On top of it, there is a excommunication towards this individual, and on top of it, he is being removed from his post as a butcher of the town. The trust can be restored only when it is known that he was willing and actually lost money in order to keep a kashrus issue. So when there is a certainty that this individual who originally his trust was breached by selling not kosher flesh, he went to a place that nobody knows him, and he was able to return a lost item that was associated with loss of lots of funds, and then only you would be able to restore him back. There is another issue that is being covered in this chapter as well, and this is what we call Basar shene'elam min ha'ain. Biblically, if a person goes on the street and he finds a piece of meat, despite the fact that there is in that region some stores which are selling kosher meat, some stores which are selling treif meat, so biblically I will determine the definition, the ruling, the destiny of the meat based on the majority. If the majority of the stores in this area are kosher, it will be assumed that the meat is also kosher. If the majority are treif, it will be assumed that it's treif. This is only biblically. However, rabbinically, any type of basar, any type of meat, shenis'ale min ha'ain, that a person lost a eye connection a connection, a sight connection, even for a minute, this meat is forbidden for him to consume unless or he has a very specific sign on the shape of the meat that this is his, or he has a double lock which identifies the meat, or he has a ability to identify. Otherwise, any basar shenis'ale min ha'ain, any type of meat that was removed from your eyesight even for a little bit, it will be forbidden. Another important issue is to trade and to make business with non-kosher items. So the general ruling of the Rambam is so there is a distinction whether the fact that it's not kosher biblically or it's not kosher rabbinically. If it is not kosher biblically, you should not initiate and deliberately be engaged in business of trading a non-kosher item biblically. However, if, for example, an individual went ahead and slaughtered a bunch of cows and some of them turned out to be treif, defected, and are not acceptably kosher, then he can go ahead and sell them. Because again, he was not initially intending to trade with them, but after the fact, it is okay. When it comes to an item that is not kosher rabbinically, for example, milk that came from a kosher cow, but a Jew was not supervising the process of the milking, so then rabbinically it is not kosher. Such an item, a person can initiate trading and making business with that to begin with. And the final ruling in this first chapter is regarding every place where it says in the Torah, lo yisoichal, lo yisoichlu, don't eat, unless otherwise has been specified what the Torah really means. Not only don't eat, but also don't benefit. Benefit means to go ahead and trade and sell and other formats of benefit. Unless or the Torah specified directly outright, or there is a straight tradition that comes via the sages. So for that reason, if an individual took an animal that it's a kosher animal but it's died without slaughtering, it's called nevelo, or treifo, as we were discussed, he slaughtered, but later after checking he realized that the animal carries a defect where she cannot really live with that defect more than 12 months. So it's considered nevelo treifo. Since the Torah specified outright that you can go ahead and sell it to the non-Jew, therefore the Torah implies that this exception, despite the fact that you're not allowed to eat, you are allowed to benefit. So for that reason, gid hanosheh and aver min hachai. Gid hanosheh is what we spoke about, the muscle, the hip muscle. There is an aver min hachai, a limb that came from a living animal. There is a tradition that despite the fact it is prohibited to eat, nevertheless it's okay to trade and to benefit from it as well. The second chapter deals with the issue with all aspects of what we called Basar becholov. Basar is meat, cholov is milk. Everybody heard that according to our tradition, any type of food that is mixed with meat and milk together, it is forbidden to eat. But it is important to introduce the background. In the Torah, never said those words. The way it's spelled in the Torah is the following words: Lo yiseva shel gedi b'chalev imoy. Don't cook a gedi, is a young lamb, with the milk of his mother. And this passage was mentioned in the Torah 3 times, twice in Chumash Mois and once times in Chumash Dvorim. And according to our oral tradition, the Torah comes to teach us that not only you are not allowed to cook meat and milk together, you're not allowed to eat, and you're not allowed to benefit from it as well. Now, it is a very unique prohibition because each and every one of those ingredients on its own will be permitted. Milk on its own is perfectly fine. Meat on its own is perfectly fine, and milk on its own is perfectly fine. When they are mixed together, then they turn to be a prohibited item. Until that point, both of them are fine. Now, since this is a very unique situation, therefore the implication of that situation are also unique as well. For example, at the moment that a drop of milk came in touch with meat while both of them were in a boiling, in a hot format. So at this point, the entire piece became a restricted item. And for that reason, if that piece of steak that is currently is right now restricted was jumping to a path, then I will require 60 times the amount of this piece of steak to be in the path to permit the consumption of the rest of the path, because the original restricted, what we called haticho nase nevelo, the item, the integrated item that became restricted, must be taken out, because while it is still in the path, everything is restricted, as we will deal in the next chapter soon. There is some exceptions. Exception number 1, there is what we called in Hebrew dikhal. In English it's called udder. In the udder of an animal, there is milk, because typically where the milk of the behemoth comes via the udder of the behemoth. Now, biblically, the milk that is in the udder is not considered milk, because only milk that comes out from a living animal, that will be milk, that will be prohibited to mix it with meat. But milks that come from an animal that was slaughtered, it's not biblically, it's not meat. Rabbinically, I'm viewing it as meat. For that reason, in order to take care of other that was mixed together with other parts, other pieces of meat, I will be able to add the other to be part of 60 in order to nullify the milk that is mixed together with them. The prohibition, the biblical prohibition, is to go and actually cook them together. Even a person is not benefiting just by cooking, he is already violating a biblical restriction that is subject to malchus. Now, but let's say a person was not really cooking, but a piece of meat fell into, let's say, into a boiling milk pot. So depends what is the stage of the iloe and tatoe. The word in English, tatoe, is the bottom. What is in the bottom? In iloe, what is in the top? What fell into what? So, and depends if the bottom, the actual pat where the things are being, where the mixture item fell in, if the bottom is hot, it's boiling, so, and whatever fell, no matter what, it will be restricted. I will view it as what we call exactly as cooking, and whatever is required to permit in normal cooking will require to permit in such a case. However, if the bottom item, if the pot is not boiled, it's tzoinen, it's cold, and into the cold milk fell a hot piece of meat. In such a case, all what is required is only to peel that part of the meat where the milk came in touch. You're peeling and it will be fine. If a cold item fell into a cold item, all what is required is just to wash and it will be kosher. By the way, it is very important to note that everything is only according to the shito, to the ruling of the Rambam, because each and every detail, there are many of the authorities who are arguing with him, and obviously when it comes to practicality, we are applying a different standards. However, it's very important since today we are covering the Rambam, so everything is being covered according to his opinion. It reminds me a very interesting vote that many years ago the chief rabbi of Israel, he was visiting the Rebbe, and he was sharing a beautiful vote where we are in our prayers, we're reciting the following passage. We asking God Almighty, "Vesolachto la'avoneinu," you should forgive for our sin. Ki rav hu. Ki rav is because plenty of sins we have made. And one of the questions, if we would have little sin, that would be a good reason for him to erase. But here we asking God Almighty, he should erase our sin because there are plenty. So he suggested a very interesting explanation, given the fact that one of the greatest sages was Rav. And although that he has an argument with Shmuel, his opponent, about the ruling, what will be the case if a hot item fell into a cold item, or a cold item fell into a hot item. So apparently most of the authorities, they are ruling that the view of Rav, when a cold item fell into a hot item, then in such a case the tatoe, the bottom one, will be overruling the top one. It's called tatoe govo. So you will ask, so what's the connection between this ruling to our request for God Almighty to erase our sin? So here is the answer. We are in exile and in trouble for almost 2,000 years. And we are begging God Almighty, he should take us out from this trouble. And God Almighty also wants to take us out of trouble. But there is an argument. God Almighty says, Shuvo elai, come back to me, make teshuva, and only ve'oshuvo aleichem. After you will do the teshuva, only then I will return to you. But us, the Jewish people, they are saying the opposite. Hashiveinu Hashem elecho, you should bring us to you, and only then venashuva. We say we'll do the teshuva later. In the meantime, you take us out from Golus. So the question, who is right? Whether Elohe Gova, whether the superior, the top one is right, or Tatoe Gova, or maybe the inferior. We are Jews al Govar. So we asking Hashem, Vesolachto la'avoneinu, Yires our sin. Ki Rav hu, even Rav agrees that when we are heated, when we are so much in trouble, when we cannot take it any longer, then Vesolachto la'avoneinu, erase our sin. So I was just thinking about when today we were covering the idea of Tatoe Govel in a case that one item, one ingredient falls into the other one. Then there is a discussion about a salty item, although it's not really cooked, but in many instances when something is salty and it comes in touch with, let's say, meat and milk, both of them are cold, but one of them is salty. So the position of being salty is considered like boiled, and for that reason, if let's say a bird, a chicken, comes in touch with a dairy product, so depends whether the chicken is in a state of raw or if it is in a state of being roasted. In a case that it's being raw, he needs to peel it. In case if it's if it's raw, he can wash it. He can just wash it. But in case it's in a state of roasted, then the salt influences the actual chicken, and he needs to peel it according to the place how far the salt gets in. There is the restriction of two people where one of them eats milk and the other one eat meat product. Can they eat it on the same table? If they knowing each other, if they are friendly with each other, they cannot really eat it on the same table unless a very clear distinction will be introduced in order to prevent by a mistake, by accident, cause each and every one of them to violate the rules of Basar v'cholov. The time that is required to wait between one meal and the other, so according to the Rambam, after a meal that is associated with meat product, the amount of time is 6 hours, and the reasoning due to the leftovers that remains between the teeth. When it comes after a dairy product, as long as he wipes out his mouth with bread or other fruits and some vegetables, he can do it immediately. Though today we have extra added restriction, but the opinion of the Rambam is to do it right away. There is a story about the Malbim. The Malbim, he was a rabbi who lived, he was in the time when the emancipation started. And amongst the youth, they felt that they discovering the enlightenment, and they never missed an opportunity to make mockery and fun of the Jewish tradition. So they met him once, and one of the youngsters came over to him and he says, I have a problem. The problem is that I have my foot is swelled. Swollen. And I went to the doctor, and the doctor recommended I should schmear it, I should put on it sour cream. And my problem is like this. Given that what is swollen is the flesh, and sour cream is dairy, and according to our tradition, we have a problem of mixing dairy with flesh. And the Malbim realized that he's there to make fun of him, and he says it's a good question, but there is also a good solution. According to the halachically solution, we have just learned that if you will wait about a week until the swell will get 60 times bigger than it is currently is, then the amount of sour cream will be annulled, nullified in the kosher, so then you will be able to smear it without any problem. In the third chapter, we are dealing about other, as I've mentioned, typically always when we say the word kosher or treif, we are associating it with meat product or the mixture of meat and milk. However, there is way more items that are vegetables and fruit and grains that they have even much more severer issues than meat products. And we're going to start all those issues one by one. The first issue is what we call hanosheh. The translation of the word hanosheh is new. This is a reference to the fact that each and every type of grain from the 5 families of grain, wheat, barley, oats, they will be prohibited to consume from the new harvest until the 16th day of Nisan. In the 16th day of Nisan, at the times when was the temple and the offering, which called the offering of the Omer, the barley offering, was brought in the temple, until that point, any grain of the new harvest is prohibited. After the bringing of the Omer, then everything is permitted. Though today we don't have a temple, and even outside Israel, according to the Rambam, the ruling is still valid and relevant as well. There is some of the restriction are certain, but there is some situation that they what is being called sofek chodosh. What is the idea of sofek? For example, he brings one example: if an individual took out from the grain that was already permitted and he went ahead and he planted them in the ground, they have not grew and did not produce new harvest, and came the next Nisan. So there is a doubt how I will view and how I will approach the status of this grain. Should I view it as a product of last year and it will be permitted, or since he's actually planted them in the ground, I should view it as a product of next year and they will have to wait for the next Oimel or the next 16th day of Nisan in order to be permitted. He gives a few more examples, and the obvious implication, if an individual actually violated this rule. So when it comes to a certain violation, the punishment obviously will be malchus. However, you cannot go and give malchus ala sofek. If something is not certain, there is no malchus. A second item that is associated with another of agricultural product, it's called klai hakerem. Klai hakerem is when an individual goes ahead and plants a seed of a grape together with a grain together. Whatever grows, it will be considered klai hakerem. Klai hakerem is a product or a result of a mixture of seeds of grapes and seeds of grain, and they are very severe restriction, to such an extent that not only a person is forbidden to eat it, a person cannot even benefit. However, in Israel, though in Israel the restriction is biblically, but in outside Israel the restriction is rabbinically. For that reason, outside Israel, only klai hakerem that is certainly was raised as a kil'aim will be prohibited. If something is under doubt, will be permitted. A third agricultural product that will be forbidden, it's called ola. Ola is any type of plantation in the first 3 years. Any product that is restricted, and it's called ola. That is, again, not only a person is not allowed to eat, a person cannot benefit, and he is forbidden from benefiting from the sale of this item. And again, though outside Israel it is prohibited as well, but again, the prohibition is not really the Rabbanon, it's halocha leMoshe miSinai. For that reason also, any doubtful outside Israel, it will be permitted. A fourth item that is not a meat product, that is forbidden, it's called tevel. Tevel is any, but this is related only to Israel. Any product that grows in the land of Israel requires to take out tumois and maisois. If tumois and maisois were not taken, tumois and maisois is contribution to the priests and to the Levi. If those necessary contribution were not given, the item is considered to be tevel. And if a person eats an item of tevel before tumois and maisois were taken, it's a severe violation. However, if he takes it before the separation of the tumois, the violation is associated with heavenly death called miso b'yedei shomayim. If he only maisois, it's only a love, but it's still a problem. Then there is other restriction that associated with agricultural product that is growing. For example, an item that was given to the priest, tumo, on an item that was given to the priest as chalo, bikuim. If a person who is not a kohen benefited from those products, he will be in violation as well. And another item that we're going back to animal product is offerings that were disqualified in the process of bringing them as offering. For example, a person who brought an offering in the temple, and the priest, while he was slaughtering, he had the wrong thought, the wrong intention, and he turns it to what is called pigul. This item is prohibited to benefit from. There is another prohibition, as we're going to cover, chometz. There is also private prohibition of wine. If a person took upon himself, became a Nazirite, so wine, he will be, each and every one of those prohibitions will be covered when we reach those halachos. Now we're going to summarize the lesson number 98. And this is basically the lesson that came on Shabbos. This Shabbos, as we mentioned before, was a very, very special Shabbos. And right at the entry of Shabbos, we have sanctified the Shabbos by the Kiddush on wine. At the exit of Shabbos, at the end of Shabbos, we have sanctified again the Shabbos via Havdolo. It was also a very important Shabbos that coincided with two yortzeit of great pillars in the Hasidic world. One of them in the first generation of the Chabad Hasidus, called Rabbi Hillel Palitcher, a legendary figure that so much is written and taught by him. Another one is a person who many of us knew, Rabbi Reuven Dunin. He lived recently, he died recently, but he was an extraordinary person that thanks to him many people became familiar with their heritage, with their identity, came back to Judaism. And with divine providence, the entire Shabbos yesterday, the issue that was covered, the issue of wine. Wine seems to be a very, very meaningful type of a product that in every turning point in history it played a significant role from the dawn of creation until today. We'll start with the first sin that brought the colossal tragedy, catastrophe, the catastrophe of death, was thanks to some opinions, the abuse of wine, because everybody knows that there is a very important opinion who explains that the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge, was basically Geffen Hoyo. It was a grape. And in fact, all what God asked him to do Kiddush in time, had he waited another 3.5 hours to make Kiddush in the right time, things would go in a totally different path. We see Noah, when he came to the Teva, was also a right intention to go and plant the vineyard. Unfortunately, it ended the way it ended. According to the mystical Kabbalah, Sarah Imenu, our mother Sarah, she attempted to rectify, and she was successful, some of the problems that have turned via the abuse of wine by Noah. Later on, we see another type of a wine that came to the daughters of Lot in the cave, and as a result of this wine, 2 nations came, which we have discussed their destiny as far as marriage, ability to marry within the faith. There is also a very important story that was shared with the Rebbe at the first Maimer when he received the leadership. There is a story which is basically very much connected with the topic that we covered Shabbos, is when the Rebbe Maharash, the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe, once upon a time, he took a very special trip to Paris, and he rented a very exclusive hotel, 5-star hotel, and he reserved a room right next to the casino of the hotel. And he came to the place where they played, and he met someone who was sitting there like everybody playing roulette or cards, and he whispered in his eyes and in his ears, and he told him, young man, you should know that yain nesech, a non-kosher wine, is thickening the heart and the mind. And he left. And those words inspired this individual. Later in the entire story, he came to the room of the Rebbe Maharash and led to a return back to his roots, and as a result, a great family of observant people were in Paris as a result of it. So we see about wine, it has a powerful energy, and for that reason, when it's used properly, it can elevate a person to very great heights, and on the other hand, it can take him down to a very horrific destinations. This Shabbos is an important Shabbos. The entire 3 chapters are speaking about one topic only: wine. In what context about wine? So first of all, amongst the products that the kashrus issue is a very critical role, and in a sense even much more severe, in one aspect even severe than other isurim, is what we call biblically yain nesech. Yain nesech, a wine that was poured to as part of the ritual of idol worshipping. Any form of yain, of wine that was poured in honor of avodah zarah, of idol worship, so this is biblically prohibited. And this prohibition is even b'mashu. Typically, most of the prohibition needs to be a minimum measurement in order to expose the individual to punishment. But the only one of the few exceptions where even mashu, the minimum amount, is already exposing the person to a punishment is when it comes to yain nesech. And the reason, because the word nesech is the idea offering, and the offering comes in context of Avodah Zorah, and the prohibition of Avodah Zorah is b'mashu, v'lo yidbak becho me'umo min acherem, nothing even stick with you, even something that is without any measurement. This is biblically. So biblically, ayin nesach, it is prohibited to consume, it is prohibited benefit, and the amount of measurement that requires is even no measurement is already exposing the individual to prohibition. Then there is a lower level, which is called stam yeinu, a wine that I don't know whether it was actually poured or didn't pour it. So any type of a wine that is in a possession of an non-Jew, presumably he may be pouring it to Avodah Zorah or not. So rabbinically it is restricted, and the punishment is makas mardus. It's a rabbinical type of a punishment. However, in order to restrict and prohibit it, there is two types of prohibition. There is a prohibition beshtio, in drinking only, and then there is prohibition behanoyo, in benefiting as well. So in order to prohibit also behanoyo, in order to prohibit stam yenum, behanoyo, 4 conditions must be met in order to prohibit it behanoyo. First of all, it must be a oived koichovim. Oived koichovim is an idol worshipper. That the individual must be defined as an idol worshipper. A second, he needs to come in direct contact, actually touching the wine. It must be done intentionally, deliberately, and it must be defined as wine. If something is missing out of those 4 conditions, so the wine not necessarily will be prohibited to benefit. It will be prohibited to drink, but benefits will still be permitted. For example, if the individual, condition number 1, he needs to be an idol worshipper. If he is known that he is a ger toishov is a non-Jew who still eating nevelois treifois, but he took upon himself to believe in one God. Such an individual cannot be considered a oived avodah zorah, as an idol worshipper. So therefore, a wine that belongs to him, will be prohibited only drinking, but to benefit from such a wine, it will be fine. Another situation, if the non-Jew, he was not touching, he was only shaking, so again, it will be prohibited to drink, but will be permitted to benefit. Or he touched it without intention, or he has no intention because he is a minor, or he happens to be an adult, but still he did it without intention. So all those type of things, the wine will be still permitted to benefit. Not to drink, but to benefit. But then, let's say this wine is not type of a wine that will be kosher to bring it as an offering to our altar. The ruling is a wine that was cooked, or a wine that was mixed with some other ingredients. It's not pure as wine, so it's being disqualified as an offering in the temple. Since it's being disqualified as an offering in the temple, so even if a non-Jew touched it, moved it, it will still be permitted even to benefit. In the end, towards the end of the Perek, the Rambam deals what will be the method to make kosher those type of utensils that were used by a non-Jew to store wine. So the general ruling, a period of 12 months is a period that can make dry, and the inside of those dishes is not going to be any more relevant in order to prohibit this utensil to usage. A person, however, he can speed up the process by a few ways, or by bringing inside the dishes type of agents that will destroy the flavor of the wine that is inside of them, or introduce a high temperature of heat that will also going to speed up the process of kashrus as far as these dishes. In the second chapter of the aspects of wine, the Rambam deals in situation that sometimes, even if he actually came in contact, and he gives an example. Let's say if a non-Jew was holding a barrel, and while he was holding the barrel, a Jew was pouring wine. As long as the barrel was not moving and he was not touching the wine, in such a case the wine will be permitted to drink as well, as long as it was full supervision that it was not the case. Then there is a very interesting case that is being dealt. A non-Jew sees that here there is a barrel of wine that is splitting, that is about to split. And as a result of splitting, everything can spill out via those splits. And he runs quickly to save the bottle by hugging it and by keeping it still whole. So depends how was the split. If the split was towards the length or the split was towards the width. If the split was towards the length, so then his supporting the barrel was actually saving the contents, and therefore it is be problematic to drink, although it will be okay to benefit because since he did not actually touch the wine. But nevertheless, however, if all he did is supporting the split that was done on the width, then he will be able even to drink the wine, since what really saved the wine is not his hug, but the weight of the upper part of the barrel. There is a case that it is doubtful where he actually touched the wine or not. So he brings an interesting scenario. Let's say if he happens to be a creditor, non-Jew happened to be a creditor that the Jew owes him money, and this particular wine was a collateral towards the loan, and he comes to the house of the Jew to collect his loan. So the question whether he touched the wine or not touched the wine. Presumably, since he has control over the wine, because legally it is tied to his loan, so therefore the wine will be prohibited. The final chapter of the yesterday's lesson was the discussion about when the wine is the possession of the non-Jew. However, the Jew lives in that particular yard and the apartment, and he goes back and forth, back and forth. So then, despite the fact that it is in the possession of the non-Jew, but since the Jew resides over there and his whereabouts coming and going is unpredictable, so therefore the wine will be kosher. There is another way that the wine will be kosher despite the fact that it will be in the possession of the non-Jew, if there is a double seal. If there is a double seal, For that reason, you see even the wine over here, they have a cork and a double seal. When they have those those double seal, it will be considered kosher even when it is in the possession of the non-Jew. There is a very interesting chidush that the Rambam makes a distinction amongst non-Jews between a Muslim and I guess amongst Christian. He says some of the restriction that are derivative, a result from our suspicion that the non-Jew have touched it. So if the only idea is about touching, so apparently if a Muslim have touched it without intention to touch it, he touched it, then according to the Rambam, I haven't followed the other poskim, it will be permitted even to drink it. That's according to the Rambam. Then he deals, the Rambam, a very interesting way to benefit from a wine, indirect benefit. For example, if a person is in the transportation business and he happened to transport wine, yain nesach, from one place to another, and he gets paid for his transportation services, he's not allowed to benefit from this wine because it's benefiting from yain nesach, that even b'mashahu it is prohibited. There is another case that a person is forbidden to benefit. Let's say he has employees and he gives ahead to the bartender or to the wine owner a X amount of cash in exchange that in the future he will give to his employees to drink from the wine that is in his possession. So he is also benefiting from the actually purchase or exchange between his funds and yain nesach. So the only way to do it right is not to give him ahead of time a retainer of cash, but the opposite. He should first feed his employees whatever he wants and only pay him later. That way it's not going to be considered exchange of yain nesach. There is one exception where a person is able to benefit from selling wine in a case that a non-Jew deliberately came and touched his wine, or he was even menasechet. So then a person is allowed to sell this wine to this particular non-Jew who has done it, because then he is not really actually benefiting, but he is getting paid for the damage that was done by him with this individual and getting his money back. That's an interesting halacha. So now we are entering finally to lesson number 99, that we will be covering also a very, very important topic from chapter 14 till 16 of Hilchos Ma'acholos Asuros. So first of all, and this covers most of the rules of Ma'acholos Asuros. The measurement, as we mentioned before, that in order to expose to a liability of punishment, the measurement that is required from any prohibited item to consume is a kezais, a olive-sized measurement. This far as exposure to punishment, but as far as prohibition, even b'mashu, because chotzi zais, a half a zais, which is a fraction of a zais, although we're using the term chotzi, but essentially it means even a little bit, also minatoiro. Biblically, prohibition starts even when it's less kezais. However, as far as punishment of malkois, it only starts with a kezais. Less than a kezais, the punishment will be makas mardus, only a rabbinical type of punishment. The amount of kezais this is the amount that his cheich is his throat will benefit from. For example, a person, let's taking a prohibited item in a kezais, If it's precisely a kezais, he is not going to be exposed to malchus, given that some of the food will be left between his teeth. So the only exposure to punishment is only that is not in his teeth, whatever his throat was able to benefit. For that reason, for example, the ruling is such: if a person took half a kezais and he swallowed it, and then he vomited, and then he consumed it again, then he will be liable. Reason: because if you will accumulate both of the half kezais together, you will have a total of a kezais that his throat has benefited from. It's called hanosheh. The amount, the measurement of kezais is not only in just a kezais, a speed, the amount of time that this kezais must be consumed. It must be consumed in the amount of time that takes for a person to eat bread in the size of 3 eggs, which is, according to the halachic authorities, it's ranging between somewhere from 4 minutes till about 9-10 minutes. That's the range. When it comes to drink, to liquids, the amount that is minimum to expose him to punishment is revis, and the amount of time is also the amount of time that takes a revis. It's today's, I would say, in a normal cup is 86 grams. Yeah, let me see. Now, it is in order also to expose a person to a liability, it must be a eatable item. A eatable item is excluding an item that is harming him. Let's say if a person swallows a boiling piece of fat, if it's boiling, he's not benefiting from it, so therefore he will be exempt from punishment. Or if it's rotten, if type of rotten food that he's not benefiting, he is also, although he's violating, but he's not exposed to punishment, because the only way to be chayav, to be liable, if it's bederech achilo, if this is the way it's being eaten. There is, however, 2 exceptions, where even if he ate them sheloi kederech achilo, even if he ate them not in a way, he ate them in a way that it's not edible, that it's harming, and this is 2 isurim: basar v'cholov, meat and milk together, and klai hakerem, as we mentioned before. Even if he ate them by harming himself in a not edible manner, he will still be liable. The reason: since the Torah refers to the prohibition of basar v'cholov not in the expression of eating, but lo yisevashel, don't cook, and when it comes to the prohibition of klai hakerem, the reference is tikdash. Tikdash is to be sanctified, to be separated. So since it is unusual expression, so therefore even in unusual style of eating, a person will still be liable as well. There is, everybody is familiar when it comes to pikuach nefesh, to safety, so anything is permitted. However, even when a person has no choice and for safety issues he must consume not kosher product, he still have to prioritize which non-kosher product he will consume. He should consume first the non-kosher product with the less severe consequences. For example, if a person has a choice right now, he is hungry and he's about to die, and he has only 2 options. He has an option or to eat a nevelo, or to eat, nevelo is a dead animal, or to eat a tevel. Tevel is a fruit or a vegetable that truma was not taken from it. So he should go after the nevelo and not to eat the fruit. Reason: because the prohibition of eating anevelo is only a prohibition of halav, but to prohibition of a tevel is a prohibition, as we said, miso bidei shomayim. So therefore, always a person, when he prioritizes and he has no choice, he needs to prioritize something that is less severe over that something is severe. The upcoming chapter is a very, very critical chapter, and this is the summary of the rules and principles of ta'arivus. Ta'arivus is mixtures. Mixtures when two types of ingredients, one type of ingredient is kosher and another ingredient is not kosher, came together. So what will be the amount that requires in order to give a person, what will be the ratio in the so-called, what will be in the proportion between kosher and not kosher necessary in order to nullify the non-kosher item and give the go-ahead for the person to go and consume it. Obviously, it's one of the topics that a endless amount of material was produced, is produced, and most likely will be produced, because it happens to be the classical text for the rabbinical ordination. So I will just going to introduce the most basic principles and rules that are leading the view of the Rambam in those issues. So, first of all, there is a distinction between what we call a rabbinical and biblical prohibition. Biblical always is called mideoraise, and rabbinical is miderabanan. So the view of the Rambam that in order to define biblically a mixture, two conditions must be met. Condition number one, it must be the substance of the prohibition mixed with the substance of the permissible item. If it's only the taste, not the substance, according to the Rambam, there is no problem biblically. Rabbinically, there is a problem, but biblically, what is prohibited is only mamoshus issu, only the substance of the issue. Another requirement, even when it comes to the substance of the issue, biblically, the ratio must be 1 kezais in 3 beitzim. It's about 17% of kezais with what we call 6 times the size of sholosh beitzim. That must be the biblical requirement according to the Rambam. If those conditions are not met, A, it is not the substance. B, even if it is the substance, but the ratio is not such, it is only a rabbinical issue. Now, when those conditions are met, there is the substance of the prohibited item was mixed with the non-prohibited item. I'll give you an example. We're speaking over here a meat of a horse that was mixed with meat or a soup of a kosher animal. So there is 2 types of mixture. There is one type of mixture which is called min b'she'eino minoi. One kind in a different kind. I'll give you an example. If a person is mixing, let's say, talking about vegetables, yeah? He takes over here a vegetable, a tomato, or a fruit that is tevel, yeah, that is not, and he's mixing it in the soup. So it's different types. He's mixing something that is a fruit with something that is watery. So we're talking over here min b'she'enoi minoi. Now, sometimes there is what we call min b'minoi. Min b'minoi, that we're talking over here about the same type. The same type. So the ruling is like this. When we're talking over here, two different types of food that were mixed together, so according to the Rambam, I have to take an anju and have him taste the dish. If he determines that the actual dish, you can feel the taste of the non-kosher ingredients, so the food is non-kosher. If you cannot feel the taste, the food is kosher. This is when min b'she'enoi minoi. Now when it comes min b'minoi, we're talking over here about two identical items. One of them is kosher, the other one is not kosher. So there is no way to taste it because both of them have the same taste. So in such a case, there is a biblical solution and there is a rabbinical solution. The biblical solution is I'm looking at the ratio of oiv majority. If the ratio is 2-for-1, so it's oiv, there is a majority in the kosher one over the not kosher one, biblically it's kosher. Rabbinically, however, they have introduced an entire scale of, depends what type of a context, subject, what is the quality of the prohibition. If the prohibition is basar v'cholov, meat and mixed together, if the prohibition is tumo and bikurim and chalo, anything that is associated with kohanim, then you require 100 times of the permitted side over the not permitted side. If it comes to orlo and klai hakerem, you gotta have 200 times in the permitted side over the not permitted side. Now, he introduces that although they are rabbinical prohibition, they are rabbinical restrictions, but nevertheless, the cue they have received from the Bible itself, in the Torah itself. The concept of the majority of the isuim of Torah, rabbinically, they will be acceptable in a mixture of 60/1, being derived from the case by a Nazir. One of the offerings that a Nazirite brings at the end of his Nazirus is called Asham Nazir. Asham is the offering of the Nazir. And the ruling is that the arm of the animal must be brought to the kohen. Typically, any property of the kohen is forbidden to a non-kohen to consume. So, therefore, obviously, while the entire animal was cooked, nevertheless, the rest of the animal is permitted for the Nazirite to consume, though part of it was given to the kohen. So the ratio of the zoya of the arm represents 1/60th of the rest of the animals. So this is the roots why most of the isuim of Torah, of the prohibitions of Torah, will be nullified by 60 times of the kosher over the non-kosher. For the reason how come when it comes to tumois and maisois, tevel, the amount will be 1/100, they found a pasuk in Torah, es mikdeshoi mimenu, that the amount that represents the contribution that the Levi needs to bring to the kohen. When a person gives 10% of his produce to the Levi needs to bring 1% of it 10% of it to the Kohen. So 10% of the contribution of the Levi represents 1% of the original harvest. And the Torah refers to this 1% as mikdashoi mimenu, that anything that is mimenu is mikdashoi, is able to go and harm the entire things. So the Torah implies in a context of Trumois the idea of 1 out of 100. So this is the remez that it is requires in Trumois and Maisois, the idea botel b'meyo. And when it comes to Olo and Klaya Kerem, given the fact that over there a person not only he is forbidden to actually eat, but he is also forbidden to benefit. So given the fact that it's a double restriction, so therefore the idea is 200 botel b'mosaim. But there is some items that will never gonna be annulled, and that's called dovo sheyesh lo materin. When chometz being mixed in a Pesach, in a product, then it cannot be even, it will be 1 in 1,000, it's not going to be annulled. The entire product will be forbidden. The reason, because it's dovo sheyesh lo materin. Anything that is restricted only on temporary basis, you will wait after 7 days, the items is anyway going to be permitted. So given the fact that the temporary by definition is something that is about to be expired, so anything that is on a temporary basis and eventually it's going to be permitted, while it is restricted, under no circumstances it will be annulled, because it's called dovo sheyesh lo materin. There is also another example, as we spoke before, yain nesech. It was also never going to be bottled, because chumas avodah zorah has a special severity of avodah zorah. For that reason, it's never going to be bottled oilon. There is another way that an item is going or not going to be suffer from a problem of mixture when it is noisen ta'am lifgam, when something is contributing a harmful taste. It is not providing flavor, but it detracts flavor. It gives over here a harmful place. In such a case, example, if a mouse fell into the wine, so when a mouse falls into the wine, obviously, and given the fact that the contribution of a dead mouse is not beneficial to the wine, it's called noisen tam lifgam, so the wine is not going to be prohibited as a result of the mixture of the mouse. Assuming that you found the mouse and you took it out, but nevertheless, the flavor that it contributed is not considered tam lishvach, it's not benefiting, but it's tam lifgam, it is a harmful contribution. In the last shiur, last chapter of today, the Rambam deals with a very interesting. We spoke before that when it comes to min beminui, we spoke about before the amount what nullifies the prohibited side. So we spoke min beminoi, the prohibition rabbinical, the permission rabbinical is via bitul of beshishim, 60 times in the permitted ingredients over the not permitted ingredients. This is in regular situation. Sometimes, even if it will, there is 60 times in the permitted ingredients over the not permitted ingredients, even then it's not going to be helpful. When it is, when the prohibited ingredients have the qualities of or a leavening agent, mechames, or spicy, or an important entity. In Hebrew it's called mechametz, metabel, or dover choshuv. If the prohibited ingredients in the ta'arives happens to be one of those three, so it's not gonna be helpful. There is another situation if the prohibited item happens to be what is called chaticho horeuyo lehiskabed. Chaticho horeuyo lehiskabed, it's a piece that is used to honor the person to host guests. When a person really wants to have guests, and he feels honorable when he can share and honor his guest with a good piece of meat. So for that reason, if the ingredient item, if the prohibited item happened to be an ingredient that falls into those 5 categories, or as I said, leavening agent, a spice, an important entity, a chaticho haruyo leiskabed, or dover shebeminion, or berio. There is berio, which means it's a living item. So then, under no circumstances, I will be able to annul it. The only way to annul it, if it's, for example, if it's a chaticho, it's crushed, that it's not a chaticho any longer, or if it's a berio, it's crushed, it's not a berio any longer, or if it's a dovo, yeah. So that's. There is also another exemption or exception. We spoke before that min b'she'enoi minoi, if there is 2 different types, so benois and tam, according to him, to the Rambam, if a goy tastes and determines that there is no contributing taste from the prohibited agent to the permitted agent, there is no problem. However, sometimes it will be a problem even if there is no taste, when the prohibited item happens to be a solidifying contributor, what is called the dover hamamid. Remember, we spoke a few lessons ago the process of making a cheese. In order to make a cheese, you are using or the container, the original container, via stomach of an animal, or sometimes you are mixing in certain ingredients within the process. So if those dovo hamami, those contributing factor that they are using as catalyst and solidifiers, they happen to be even min b'she'enoi minoi, they are different types, and they're not contributing any taste, but given the fact that thanks to them they were able to give a quality contribution to the food, so then it's also one of those exceptions. So we have learned something very interesting, that in order to determine ability to be nullified or not nullified, not always a quantitative approach will be a determining factor, because sometimes there is strong qualities that they are overriding the quantitative strength. For that reason, one of the reasons that God Almighty said to Moshe Rabbeinu to count the Eden so many times, and the obvious question, why was it necessary for God Almighty? Don't he know the amount of Am Yisrael that keeps making a census, another census, another census? So one of the reasons that are being given, that here there is the halocha, dover shebeminion, an item that is important, or spicy, or leavened, or dover shebeminion, accountable item, something that it's usually being counted. So the fact that it's being counted adds such a chashivus that under no circumstances it will be nullified. So Jews, by God Almighty, keep counting them before the Egel, after the Egel, before entry to Israel, gave them such a chashivus that even though they should be nullified amongst the nations. Nevertheless, we still Am Yisrael Chai despite all challenges. Thank you so much. And
דבר אחד שאמרת בין תבל לנבלה.
טרפה ונבלה?
כן, לא, באכילה אני מתכוון.
נכון.
אז תבל את מתכוון,